hard work takes. Good. Really, many yes, about it. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Family Services Select Committee. I am Councillor Will Pascal, Chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event has been streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. I would like to welcome all those at Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall and everybody watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask everyone present, please make sure your mobiles are on silent or switched off. We will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you, everyone. This is the first meeting of this year, and I'm very pleased to welcome Councillor Will Lane, my left, to the committee as the new Vice Chair. Current Governor Representative Irfan Ahmad, pronounced correctly, and Nicholas Kyprios. Church of England Representative Rebecca Timms, Catholic Diocese Representative Kathleen Williams, Head Teacher Representatives Jagdeep Birdie and Mariella Ardron. I very much look forward to working with you for this year, and thank you for joining us. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Pretty Hudd, Mariella Ardron, and Sonia Davidland for being late due to delays on the tube. Does anybody have any interest to declare? Basically, it's pecuniary interest. Thank you very much. Now, the first item of that is that we do the minutes of the previous meetings. In fact, there are two previous meetings. One was a full previous meeting on the 8th of May. As I understand, the action tracker has laid out for you in the papers today further actions coming out of that meeting, which have largely been completed. And some of them are also going to be taken up in our agenda going forward work program. And then there's also the meeting, it's also the agenda tracker for last year, 24-25, and I believe that you've checked that all those actions have been completed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say that Rebecca Clements has given her apologies.
Right. Okay. Now, there's been a further meeting on the 21st of May, which was a sort of technical meeting in the council chamber to appoint myself as chair and Councillor Will Lane as vice chair. And I've proposed that the two sets of minutes are agreed to now formally. Because quite a few of you weren't actually at those meetings, so it's a bit strange to ask you to approve it, but I mean, that's technically what has to happen. So.
Well, having been at those meetings, I'm quite happy. I would propose all second as appropriate.
Okay, well, if you propose, and
I'm happy to say
I'm doing Harley. No, second. Okay, thank you very much. So the major item we have on the agenda tonight is the Children and Young People's Plan 2 years on. Those of you who were here last year will recall that we had a 1 year on report last year in the briefing before the year before that. It's a sort of 3-year program, I believe, and therefore this will be the final report on that program. And the proposal is there would be a further further report drafted for spring 26, and kindly asked us the scrutineers to pick up on issues and feed them into the drafting of that. We'll come back to that a bit later on. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Catherine Fuchs, lead member, and Annabelle Saunders, if you'd like to give a very brief introduction to this report.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. Welcome to the new members of the committee. It's nice to see you here. So really, this is pretty straightforward. It's a 2-year progress of our children and young people plan. It flags out how important it's been both to produce the plan in the first place by listening to children and young people and having their voice coming through it. And what this shows is that we didn't stop there. We've kept going back, speaking to children, speaking to families, and really finding out, is this working for you? Do you think we're delivering on what you said you wanted us to deliver on? And I think it's sort of quite clear in here that, well, I would hope to think that we have achieved what we're set out to achieve and will continue to do so. But I don't know if Annabelle, if you want to add to that.
Thank you. And for those who haven't met me, I'm Annabelle Saunders, and I'm Director of Operations and Programmes for Children's Services. And I'm also joined by Bella. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Bella Jewell and I'm Head of Strategy and Business Intelligence in Children's Services.
Fantastic. So thank you. I mean, essentially, that's it. I brought on a copy of our original Children and Young People's Plan, so by all means, take a copy if you'd like. This is our, as you said, this is our strategic overarching document. It really sets the tone in terms of what we want to achieve with and for our children and young people. In developing it, there was, in 2023, there was extensive engagement with young people themselves, select committee, and a number of our partners. And one of our commitments was that we will look to assess how well we are performing annually. And so we last year we did a 1-year-on report, and this is now our second year-on report, to try and keep that transparency in terms of the commitments to meeting some of those objectives that we set out. It very much underpins our council plan as well, and it really is the kind of golden thread through all that we do within children's services. I suppose the other thing to say is that as well as this 2-year-on report, also attached to the papers is our Children and Young People's Plan dashboard, and that is our quarterly data dashboard that gives a summary of our key performance measures. And that's something that I know that you have all seen previously, and we will continue to bring back to scrutiny, and that is structured. Our data is structured across the 7 themes that we've set out in our Children and Young People's Plan. So together, the year-on report, or 2-year-on report, and our quarterly data dashboard, that provides us with evidence for you to scrutinise and for us to demonstrate the progress that we're making.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps by way of suggestion, I would want to make 2 suggestions. First of all, about how we approach this, and I must say there's a lot here, so thank you for that, and a lot of information. I'm suggesting that we take the priorities in order, and we've had 3 meetings with people that read the papers, so we've got a member of the committee to kick off the discussion on each of the priorities. A slight plea for the future. It's one for the way in which the reports are presented. As you'll all be familiar, having read the papers, that on page 23 of the papers of this committee, priority 1. On page 35 is the dashboard graphic, which is numbers with a slide number as well. And then on page 44, there's a very interesting text, which actually fills in a lot of the detail. And I certainly felt reading the priority first, and then bizarrely the one at the end, the second, and then if you look in dashboard, I can understand it best. But the route map to do that looks like that, which is a bit complex. So I would make a plea in the future if we could have the report, if we're going to address it under priorities. Priority as it was set, Then we have the commentary and then the graphics on the dashboard. And then priority 2 and the same process, because then they would hang together. Otherwise, you have to do a lot of, as we're going to have a lot of paper rustling this evening. Just to interject also, Sonia, thank you very much for sending me a text in advance of the meeting to your difficulty with transport, but it's much appreciated to have that notice. So if we could kick off on priority 1, David, I think you wish to do kick it off on priority 3.
Thank you. Annabelle, Catherine, in the context of budgetary pressures, in the context of political pressures and what's going on, and are the resources and the structures present to enable the outcomes as set out in priority 1? Present. Is it sustainable in the medium term, let alone long term?
Is that priority 1 or
That's
Yeah.
Priority
Right.
1 only.
That, I mean, we would hope so, obviously. I mean, as you will know, and I know something that you always want to find out in this committee, is what is it that we have to do as a statutory duty, and what do we do which is extra on top of that. Obviously we're very proud of our children's services and getting Oxford 3 years running, and that we're very proud of the development. So as you know, schools hopefully we're hoping that our school funding will continue as it is, as that goes per pupil. So and that's one of the reasons that we do get such outstanding performances in this borough, because of the school funding. In terms of the sort of social care, education, wider partners, you know, we have to be completely honest. We've got fantastically challenging times ahead of us with the new funding formula does not favour in the London councils, and we're all going to be under a huge amount of pressure. And I think what that means is that we'll just have to work more closely with our partners and absolutely maximising all that we're all doing to support our children and our people to absolutely deliver on our priority outcomes of good development, and that we will continue to be an outstanding children's services.
And I mean, I completely agree, and that's really well said. I mean, we know that actually this age group is the most pertinent in terms of our area of focus and our area of investment. So that best start in life, if you get it right, will deliver long-term improved outcomes for our children and young people. So it will continue and will always be a priority. You know, if you look back at the original plan and what we committed to, there's nothing in there that I can see would drop away. How we deliver some of these services might change over time, but this priority will be sustained. And it is worth saying it is shared across our public health colleagues as a core priority for them, and our health colleagues, both in terms of their strategic planning and our health and wellbeing strategy. It's a shared ambition.
Yeah, and also just to, you know, as you just said, it is this whole thing about the earlier you can intervene, the earlier you can spot an issue with a child and deliver sort of speech language community training, any of the things that we've got here, then you're likely to you know, not develop into something that might be, and I hate to say costly, but I mean more costly in the future when you're having to do more expensive interventions with them. So I would say this would be, you know, still our priority, as long as the money we've got, that we'll be focusing on the early years and early intervention.
And some of these, actually, I mean, some of these examples here, certainly the first two are about that earlier intervention, both to deliver better outcomes, but actually to change path in terms of school readiness and even the need for an EHCP. So is that, you know, providing that targeted speech language support early on so that an EHCP may not be needed. So actually some of this is not just the right thing to do, it's the most prudent thing to do.
Thank you very much. Now, there's no need, but this is our first meeting, just to sort of say that in our pre-meet, we decided on trying to find somebody to lead in each area. And everybody is welcome to speak, but in the interest of time, and if you don't want to speak, there's no pressure to speak. So who would like us to comment on this priority 1?
Yeah.
Sonia.
Thank you. So what does it actually mean to be school ready at 5? And what are some of the really sort of tangible metrics that you look at to measure how successful we are? Because I know it seems to be the case we run lots of good programs, like the Little Learners program and so on. But in terms of, is there a clear list of what we're actually looking at, what the problems are, and then how well we're doing when we measure it?
Well, there'll be some simple things like being toilet
Yes.
trained and things like this. And animals might have the most detail, but again, it will be about being able to communicate, being able to speak English and
Yes.
communicate in English as a language would be one of the things. Because we know if they're starting school and they just can't sort of actually understand what they're being told or understand instructions, then you're already on a sort of downward trajectory of being able to keep up with the rest of your class.
Yes, and we have a specific measure called good level of development.
Okay, so that's that one in the corner.
Yes,
Right.
and so that's broken down across a number of measures, but it's essentially looking at that communication and language, child's ability to listen, attend, understand. It's very based on the sort of social emotional, relationship building, managing self-regulation, again, in order to support kind of education and learning, and then some of the kind of gross motor, so larger and fine motor movements. And within there's kind of literacy and maths and so on. But it is essentially how ready are they to be able to attend school and learn. So it's a really important measure and kind of a multi-agency commitment to kind of support that.
And sorry, just one more question. So that figure, 69.7%, is that an increase on previous years in terms of good level of development? It's in the bottom right corner of slide 3.
You're looking at our slides.
Sorry.
No, it's quite right. Well, it's exactly.
Because there are really good stats on that slide.
Yes, at the bottom corner in the under 70. So that's 70.2. We're sort of on the average of 70.
Yes, I mean,
just out of interest to see
whether there's been progress. I don't this is quite a dated measure already. They're actually changing the formula for this, which makes comparison quite difficult. So there's a slightly different measure around good level of development. And actually the figure that you've got, because it's sort of an annual fee, is quite dated. So I mean, I can certainly come back to you in terms of how we now compare with new and old. But it's for this measure not as simple. It's not been as simple.
Okay, Annabelle, very quickly, how do the head teachers say that standards have changed since pre-COVID? Are we beginning to pull out of it or not?
Do you want to say it?
Quietly, this is actually a measure of reception, end of reception data. There's 17 strands in the end of reception data, and as Annabelle just said, including managing self and otherwise. There is a pattern, a borough-wide pattern of children not achieving certain aspects within the 17 areas. You have to achieve all 17 to be able to give a good level of development. Even pre-COVID, our good level of development was always one of the only areas in which this borough lagged other boroughs, and it's an ongoing issue for us. And it only applies to it's only measured in state schools. So we only measure 50% of our children in this data. So and of those children, they're more likely to be eligible for pupil premium, and therefore, as a measure, it's in giving you an indicator of what's happening at the end of reception, not an entry to school, after a year of entry to school. It isn't changing. It is remaining as a measure at the moment, but it is likely to change, I report, because they have started doing a baseline assessment, which is not actually very useful, but it was introduced at the end of the last government.
Could I ask some supplementary, which is this lag that's remaining and being hard to shift, remaining as much in the schools where the nursery and early years are in the same schools as reception and so on, primary, or is that joining up of the dots, so to speak, by having co-location of those year groups helping to solve that problem?
It would be a good measure for you to ask from officers to do that data analysis to see whether school-based nurseries provide whether there is a greater level of development in
Maybe we could,
nurseries.
instead of asking for a question, Annabelle, would it be better, instead of asking for an answer to that now, that we actually record that? Well, I didn't expect you to come on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. It's a helpful point to make, actually.
Could we ask Yusuf to note that
Yeah.
as a request to officers? So
Yeah, I think that is an excellent point, and also really a point really well made about where that data comes from around good level of development, and we see that with some of our public health data as well around obesity and so on. They're measures of our state schools, and so are slightly skewed. So it's a helpful point.
So it's a minority of children.
Okay. Can I ask anybody else want to make a point on this, or should we move on to priority 2? Let's move on to priority 2. And on priority 2, we had Rebecca down. Now she's not here. So would anybody else like to ask a question on priority 2?
I did have one, and it's at the bottom. You've got half a dozen bullet points. In 2025, you'll focus on bullet points. I'm not going to read them all out. Are they a success to date? So this is bottom of page 24, Annabelle.
Mhm.
Are they a success, or are they work in progress?
You'll be shocked. I mean, I'll start, and then I'm sure Annabelle or maybe Bella will follow on as we do. So, I mean, this is still obviously work in progress. I mean, we know that something that we're very concerned about is suspensions and exclusions, and it's something that personally I am, and that we're doing a whole piece of work on.
And I know that this committee has done some work on
It has, but I think one of the issues seems to be clarifying the different terminology that people are using, and actually what does suspension actually mean? Because it can be anything from 1 day to 5 weeks, there's all sorts. So actually what we're trying to really pin down is, or one child gets suspended 5 times. So the numbers, when you get the end number in your graph here, is quite confusing because it doesn't really give you the answer to what's actually going on the ground. So it's something that's really, really important, because we know how, if a child's being suspended a lot, then that's going to be really detrimental to their education, to their confidence, to all the rest of it, their integration in the school. So we're not only stopping there, we want to work backwards to find out why have they got to the point, or what are the factors that might be causing that child to be getting into a situation where they are being suspended in the first place. So this goes back to the whole, early intervention and early years bit. And one of the things that we're sort of pointing or looking at closely, and I think Jagdeep might want to comment, that I think it's very closely connected to school attendance. So if you track even back down to primary school, that if attendance of a child will start dropping off there, and then you look at them sort of coming up to 15 and 16, then their attendance will have really dropped up, and then they're more likely to be suspended. And so what can we do right early on in primary schools when we're seeing a child might be at risk or just not attending? And I know we've got programs in place, and the schools work really hard at keeping the attendance up. But, that's one of the areas of focus. That's rather long answer.
No, that's perfect. Yeah.
Does the inclusion strategy have a role in this?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and the inclusion strategy tends to this directly. Yes, and there's an action plan that supports the inclusion strategy.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just a question about take-off priority outcome 2. I just noticed that you talk about performance at GCSE and A level. I can't find anywhere on that page either apprenticeships or T levels or MBQs, and they're not called MBQs anymore. But I just caution against focusing only on GCSEs and A levels, because often it can be children from perhaps lower socio-economic backgrounds that will do something like an apprenticeship or T level, and it's probably more important actually that we're at the top of that rather than being at the top of GCSEs and A levels. So just if we could also look at those as well as GCSE and A levels, and it'd be great to understand actually where we are on that front.
Yeah. No, it's good that we should collect that data, and obviously we do, because of course we give quite a lot of apprenticeships here in the council too, which is providing them. So we should have those numbers. But just on that, I mean, I agree with you. I'm a great advocate for apprentices, apprenticeships, and we talk to schools and go out and try to encourage more children to do them. And to break down the stigma for some children who are thinking that it's not the right thing to do and they should be going to college. And hopefully we're going to bring forward a whole new strategy around supporting that shortly.
Anybody else?
I think it's in the section, it's dormant cases for missing in education. What does that mean? Who decides that they're going to be removed? And what is, if a child is missing in education, they're dormant, but we don't know where they are, how do you decide to remove them? I'm a bit confused by that.
Where are you looking at, Sally?
Is that, am I in the wrong, it could be the wrong section, but if the dormant cases are next to missing in education on the
It's either page
on the
24.
slide, on page, I'm rather confused.
So one of the things, obviously, we always say about the needs in this borough is that we you don't know who.
Slide 4.
Oh, okay. Missing education.
Yeah, missing education. It's obviously encouraging to see the numbers. So, but it does say that.
It's a very good point, and I think we should. Can we come back to you with a written answer to that one?
Thank you.
If you
Yes. I mean, I suspect that some of those cases may well include those who are actually health reasons or long-term conditions that aren't able to access education, and that's been a sort of a long-term established position. But we need to clarify that.
Is that you? Because obviously that's why we've got hospital school. Some of those children. Okay, so why they're completely missing is something we need to know. Thank you.
Could I clarify one other thing on that? Is that slide seems to state in the first box on left that this is data of 23 and 24. As per usual, this data is very old. That the bit missing education box doesn't actually have a date in there. It has quarters, but maybe if it's the same years, what would be of particular interest is what's happening more recently. I understand that you have a problem with putting more recent data in. The question is whether when you come back and answer that, can you make sure you reference it to the right year, and also, if you can, current trends.
I think unless specified, and I'll defer to Bella, but unless specified, the quarters are, this is a quarter 4, as in 2024 quarter 4. So unless specified, so where it says Q3 and Q4, that would be 2024. Where we have annual figures, we'll specify that they are not the latest quarter. Is that right?
Yeah, the children missing education and the electively home educated children is of recent data. So of the last financial year, Q4 example.
Yeah, so that's a worrying trend if it's going to go that way. But you can comment on that, please. Thank you. Okay, so I need more points on 2. 3. Councillor Lerby, you wanted to ask the question on priority 3.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for presenting this report. It's quite good reading and gives a lot of information. But my question is on the 3 is what specific actions is the Royal Borough Council Chelsea family children are taken to protect children and young people from serious youth violence, online harm, abuse and neglect, in particular also from disadvantaged background. How do we measure as a authority where the young people are genuinely feel safe at home, at school and in the community?
So what I would say is, in terms of serious youth violence and harm, this is very much a partnership, both in terms of children's services but internally from the council with our community safety team. So they lead a lot of the response on behalf of the council. but also a partnership, as you'd understand, with police. What children's services have been developing, and it's listed here amongst a range of other services, is a targeted prevention team, and so that's within our early help service, and they're a kind of a street-based, detached-based outreach service that we use around areas where we believe there is concern. It might be kind of particular hotspots or kind of points where we've had some intelligence. So it's about visibility, but it's also about providing that sort of support engagement with young people when we see them. And because they're part of early help, they've got strong links to our youth services and other services, diversionary services. So their role is to actually hold a little bit of casework, provide them support, and to try and divert from sort of criminal activity, serious violence, etc. There's as I say, that there's a lot of work that goes on, and we have a serious violence partnership board with sort of multi-agency partners, and they look at sharing intelligence and information, both kind of sort of with our partner agencies, police, internally, but also then thinking about how we use our kind of voluntary sector to support those efforts too.
Yeah, and actually, just by coincidence, I was on the London Violence Reduction Unit call with all the London councils today, and of course that's really very much part of what they're doing as well, and how they're intervening. So, but I mean, just some interesting things they were saying, because we're all here. They were saying, as I think we've got here, on the whole, it's gone down. So, the impression is that it's gone up and there are more knife crimes, but actually it's gone down, which is positive. But it's sort of changed, and the changes were the worrying bit, which was that there are now more girls involved, which was as a higher percentage of girls. That was where the increase, and also how the age group was now going lower from down to 10. That people getting involved in this, which was really, really concerning. And so, as well as what we're doing with the children, the other point, as we always talk about here, is also how are we supporting the parents and how are we helping them learn. So, of course, one of the key things about that is, or one of the reasons from their data, was it was more prevalent in houses where there was an absent father. And so the more that you've got the father involved with the child and the child's schooling, then the less likely the child was going to end up being in a situation like this. So, this is, as Annabelle said, it's multi-agency, and it's not, not just the children, it's the families, it's the schools, it's all of us working together to pick up any sign when we see a child might be at risk of being, sucked into this sort of behaviour.
Thank you.
Ask a question, please. How well do you think the coordination is among the multi-agency different divisions? Do you think it's coordinated well, just out of curiosity? Or is there any way to show that that's coordinated well?
So it's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer. I mean, as Annabelle said, we have all these different groups where we have all the partners in one room talking about what they're doing. But there will obviously be crossover, and because there's crossover, there'll probably be little bits that also get left as a result of that. And I don't know how one, it's a good point to make. I mean, one of the things that MOPAC do, which I was interested in because I didn't know that, so I probably should, was that they do a cognitive therapy program for children, they're actually sort of seeing CBT for young children that the police funding. Well, I only found that out today, so that wasn't very coordinated for me to find that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and one that I'll certainly bring up when I'm next at one of these meetings to say how are they proving that, or whose responsibility maybe it is to have the overarching view down on all the different partners as to how they're interacting together.
Yeah, and I think that the answer might be different sort of if you look at kind of different parts of the system. So that there's probably many answers to that in terms of how good are we at sharing data on kind of live instance in order to safeguard and protect from harm. There's probably something about kind of our strategic priority setting and thinking about our resourcing. What I would say is certainly our social care reforms are looking at, within children's services, are looking at extending the role of our police partners and health partners within social care setting. Obviously, there's a question about funding that, but certainly that's the national direction from government around child protection, and lots of this is about contextual safeguarding of children, that we have police as part of our social care system. And so there's definitely a move to extend partnership, which is positive. But I think there is still a question about kind of at the national level, how is that funded?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Anu?
Sorry.
You.
So overall, are you able to say whether we have made progress on this priority outcome? Because it's quite, I don't know, the data looks quite mixed, but at the same time, the numbers are quite low. So there's been a significant upward trend of serious violence last year, but I think the numbers are all quite low. So it's sort of difficult for me to be able to tell. Obviously, you know, it's good that we introduce new programs and work with parents, etc. But in terms of the actual outcomes, how can we tell whether we're making progress or improving?
It's probably worth stopping any answer or response about you know, criminal activity or serious violence or violence with, you know, any incident. Many have profound and you know, lifelong potentially impact on families and victims. So any incident is one too many. I think just echoing, it's interesting. The London picture is very much echoed at a local level. So our incident rate is lower than that experienced pre-pandemic. So in terms of looking at serious youth violence incidents, the prevalence is lower, but I think the picture that we're seeing is changing. So that there will be higher harm offences, and you talked about kind of that and kind of use of weapons and so on. So it's a changing picture, I would say, and I think some of this goes very much hand in hand with, you know, we are seeing rise in preschool meals, in family deprivation, and there is a real correlation between serious violence and deprivation. So it's quite difficult to look at this measure. I think you're right also to point out we are looking at quite small numbers. When you look at some of those graphs, they can seem quite high, you know, high rises. I think what is positive in terms of the reoffending rate, that seems quite a lot lower. And so I suppose in terms of what we're directly able to influence in terms of where we know our young people who are in that criminal justice system, we are able to work with them to deliver a positive outcome. So I think that's quite a heartening figure.
Just to ask on that, what are you attributing the success in terms of reducing reoffending? What are you attributing that to?
I mean, I'd have to probably say, so
we'd have to say our outreach team.
Well, it's our outreach team, it's our youth justice team as well. So we have a dedicated staff to do with dedicated service that supports our young people, so our youth offending service. So it is about knowing our cases. They're actually separately inspected, so that had third inspection that children's services received. And so it is about knowing our cases very, very well and being able to work with them quite intensively, and also the richness of the opportunity and the offers and the other activities that we can support our young people with. But I think they're probably doing different things. And our outreach team is about kind of diversion, and our youth offending team is about breaking that cycle.
Yeah, and also our youth clubs. I mean, obviously the ones that we're continuing funding and investing in those for after school activities and engaging, you know, and we know they do absolutely tremendous work, and not, you know, and our other sort of voluntary sector partners at helping people, you know, stay off the street or having somewhere they can go when they feel like they're getting into trouble. So we've got, you know, a lot to thank our voluntary sector for all they do as well.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we could move on. Well, Lane, would you like to ask a question of Roger?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions about this priority. My first just relates to the paragraph that starts with the goal. I just wanted to dig down a bit and understand how this has functioned in practice in relation to promoting diverse cultural backgrounds and tailoring provision and opportunities accordingly. I mean, does that mean that depending on someone's race, they'll be offered different provisions or opportunities versus them coming from a different background? To me, I'm just struggling to understand why that would make a difference. Someone wants to study maths at Imperial or start a plumbing business. If that's what they want to go on to achieve, why would their background make a difference in terms of the provisions and opportunities they're accorded? And does this include affirmative action, or does it not? Do people get offered the same chances no matter what background they come from? That'd be the first question.
So so in Kensingtonshire. So the obviously the top one was Westminster. The social workers do, and so it's the pathways for the care leavers. So I think really what it's saying is that the consideration of the care leavers' identity and their family and what their interests might be. So it's actually more the systemic training that we use with everything. So it's listening to them, listening to their family, their experiences that they've come through, what they might want to do, how they want. So I don't think it's at all prescriptive, that you were slightly suggesting it's a prescriptive thing, saying, you're from there and therefore we should at all. It's more a total sort of listening and understanding and supportive of that background to help encourage them to, follow their ambition and what they want to do. So it's sort of turning it on its head from maybe how you were describing it.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Would you like to add?
No, I mean, I think that's really well articulated, and I think just thinking, this kind of weaves through our education and our resources and our textbooks, and it really is that kind of cultural competency. So it's ensuring that every young person is given the tools to thrive, and also given kind of that aspiration and the role model, so they can see who they want to become in the people around them. So it really is, as you've said, it is about approaching kind of all of our interactions, and this is a big part of our practice model in terms of social care, making sure that we're culturally appropriate, so that we can support families in a meaningful way, and that runs through all of our work. We know that our young people, our children, young people, will have better outcomes if they can see themselves in the books that they read, and in the role models that they see.
Thank you, that's helpful. And I did just have a couple of follow-ups as well, just in relation to the statistics in the top right. 2.8% of 16, 17-year-olds who are NEET, and how that compares to the national average in Westminster. And I know in the slide pack it's also got the London data, which I think is about 1.9%. So I mean, compared to our peers, I suppose in London, Westminster 1.9, across London about 1.9, with 2.8%, we're about 50% higher than that. Is there a specific reason why we're quite a bit higher?
So one, that's actually quite a small number.
It's actually 48 at the moment.
48. But the other thing is that we always say is that we actually know them all. So a lot of London boroughs will slightly the numbers can be slightly fudged by saying, well, we haven't tracked all those people. So they might have another 20, 30 children that they don't know where they've gone to. They've gone out, they've left the area, they've sort of stopped engaging with them. They haven't followed them up. And what we would say is that we really absolutely follow up our children. We know where they are, we know what they're doing, so that we can continually engage with them to try to get them to engage with some sort of skills and training. So, obviously, so we don't want to have, anyone that's need. And certainly when I was mentioning earlier about the piece that we're working on for skills and training and apprenticeships and all of that, that I know Councillor Taylor-Smith and myself, our priority actually was to absolutely focus what we could do in that piece of work of addressing the NEET cohort. I mean, obviously the reason their NEET means that they are quite hard to reach. There'll be all sorts of numerous issues why they are in that situation. and why they'll be harder to get them to engage. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't try our absolute hardest to do that.
Yeah, exactly that. I was looking at this figure. So for Q4, it's 48 young people, and I think there's two separate figures. There's the NEET figure and there's the not known figure. And our not known figure, I think, is something like 0% or 1%, or it's 0 point something. It's incredibly low. So when you look at that, if you were to look at the NEET and the not known together, I think it's performing very well.
Yes.
Thanks. And sorry, just very quick final point. I think it'd be really useful with figures like that to have sort of ward breakdown, because we don't know if the decrease or increase is sort of driven by certain wards. I'm thinking about the south of the borough versus the north. So yeah, I know that's not in there, but it would be really good to see.
Just a question to Ben, actually. Do we track where the needs are little?
Yeah, so we did an analysis looking at last year's cohort of NEET children and young people, and it did show kind of disproportionality across the wards in Kensington and Chelsea, with the most deprived wards having the highest proportion of NEET 16 and 17-year-olds as compared to the general population. So we do track, and we have done some of that analysis.
That's really useful to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody else on this one, or should we move on to number 5? Number 5. Well, it's the second start for.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, my first question, it was in relation to the youth council, and I know really great work is done there. And last year as mayor, it was fantastic to meet them. I suppose my point would just be in terms of the socio-economic background that children come from when they enter things like the youth council. I mean, in my experience, it does tend to be people with parents that can push them towards doing those types of activities. And I just like to sort of press home how important it is not just to have the council diverse in terms of gender and race and things like that, but just making sure we do have children from backgrounds that don't have parents that will support them in that type of thing. So that was a point more than a question, but I just wondered whether it's addressed by the report, whether you could address it now.
Well, I mean, I would go back to the youth clubs, which are absolutely would be sort of trying to encourage, and they do encourage. I mean, particularly Earls Court Youth Club are amazing at encouraging their young people to take part in the youth council. And I would say that they have allowed a voice for a lot of the parents there. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of those things that's difficult to go out and say we're then going to sort of not look at the children who've got parents who've very much been focusing on to do them, that they have less of a priority. But you're right. No, I mean, we would want to encourage as many young people, and I think this, it would probably not be the schools so much that would be encouraging, but more through our youth.
I was actually going to ask schools, and even primary schools, and even at early stage of primary schools, is there a role there to encourage people to speak up? I'm just thinking about school council and leaders in sports teams and leaders in debates and a whole range of out of school activity in class, and people who lead on music, dance, things, not only through different stages.
Certainly, I know that our community engagement team, who are to coordinate that youth council, really one of their priorities is to connect school councils so that we can amplify the voice of many more children that are having their say through school council. So that's something that they've been working on. The other thing I'd say is the youth council is a brilliant resource in terms of getting feedback, but it's by no means our only resource.
Yeah.
And certainly in development of the plan, we went to a huge number of groups, recruited lots of young people from a range of backgrounds to provide future scenario visioning, what they want their future to be. And we also have our SEND news crew, so SEND young people, and we have our children care council and group. So we've got a number of different engagement mechanisms, and we're always thinking about how we can strengthen that, working with young ANC in youth clubs and so on.
And just in addition, we also have schools come in debate, you probably were there, in the chamber, which is a great opportunity for them to come and see what it's like to sort of have your voice and, you know, put your thoughts forward. And I think they're really powerful when we have those school debates in there.
And I did just have one further question on that, Chair, if I may, on priority 5. Just in relation to the Summer Plus programme and employment, education, training, and work experience. Just to sort of, I was curious to know, work experience, is it paid or not, and how long is it? Because I think that for a lot of children at that age, 16, 17, if they do come from a poor background, and let's say they're working, I think it's really tough actually to take time off and do work experience or an internship if it's not paid. So just if you could speak a bit more about that program and how you sort of help children perhaps from those type of background do that.
Well, I mean, one of the things that obviously when you're saying the work experience, I mean, it slightly depends who's giving them the work experience. I don't know if they get paid when they come with you. Do you want to talk about what we do from the council perspective?
So the Summer
And then I'll
Plus,
talk about side it exactly.
brilliant. So
Yeah.
the Summer Plus programme in particular
Yeah.
is targeted at children that have care experience or
Yeah.
care leavers.
Mm.
So they're over the age of 16 and they're in their summer holidays. And actually we have 2 work placements coming to my team over July, which we're really excited about. I'm not sure the financial assistance, and we can follow up on that, but that is a targeted programme in the summer holidays, really around working with those children that have care experience, to support them to get that experience that puts something kind of on their CV. So whilst they are on those placements, as well as doing kind of real work and really experiencing things, there's also support around CV creation if they are also looking for paid employment now that they are 16. But I'd have to follow up on the kind of financial assistance and the access point, but it's facilitated by our colleagues who work with looked after children and care leavers, so we'll be very aware of any kind of barriers to that work experience.
That's really helpful to know. Thank you.
Yes, and I don't know if you, I mean, I'm sure you came across our supported internship programme, which is fantastic as well.
So we can move on to 6. Nicholas, if you've got a question you'd like to ask, that's it.
I do, but it's kind of a holistic question, so this is my first time, so I'm gonna give it a go, but it states all children, so there's a couple of things. It seems to focus on a limited number of children, so I don't know what the all means at first, so I don't know how that's quantified. It said, my second question is the fair funding formula. Is there enough money to continue this? So then the next question is, you've mentioned a number of times, Councillor Fox, about these youth clubs. I've had 3 children in schools here. I've never experienced youth clubs. I think youth clubs is a great idea, and obviously that needs funding, but that keeps kids off streets. And I don't know what we can do to augment or further support youth clubs. And then I have 2 further on questions about the slide. But if it just generically, is it really focused on all children? Because this slide talks about a lot about kids with special education needs and disabilities. It talks a lot about food, but I'm not sure that this priority outcome in terms of a diverse range of activities, opportunities for the physical, mental, and emotional health is really being addressed.
Well, thank
So I know
you.
that's a whole.
Isn't quite a big lot to answer there. So I'll start on the youth clubs, and as you can see in the sort of second point down, that we've just committed nearly £5 million towards funding our youth clubs, which was a huge piece of work that Annabelle was leading on, and we absolutely changed the whole system of funding our youth clubs by actually again listening to our young children, a bit like we did with this actually, to see what their priorities were, what they wanted to see delivered in our youth clubs. And then our youth clubs actually came to pitch to us for various funding. I mean, we could have a long conversation about that. And working with Young K and see. So in terms of your bit about leveraging it, I mean, funding is an issue, and is, I'm afraid, going to get more of an issue. And so leveraging the funding that the council can do is going to be more and more important. And one of the reasons we changed how we funded our youth services was by putting the funding through Young KNC, who are a local charity, so that they could actually use our money to attract match funding money from other sources to help put more money into our youth services. Because obviously council is not a charity, so we can't ask people to volunteer directly to us. And on that fund, you know, all our youth clubs do incredible work actually of raising money from our community, who are incredibly generous at helping to fund them. So I mean and we have a really good youth club offer. So we're often amazed when people go, oh, they're at the youth club. We've got amazing youth clubs, but I think often the problem we have is actually communicating that they're there, and we're aware of that, and we're putting in more work to try and get more people aware of what actually is available to them. I mean, I think the point you made about picking up on the all is, you know, it's a tricky one. I mean, all children, you know, we'd be in Laverne if all our children were happy and you know, that would be a fantastic position to be in. But, you know, realistically, you know, all children aren't all going to be. But I think going back to the stat that we picked up right early, that this is mostly a lot of our children sort of will be at private schools and maybe not be slightly outside of the system that we're supporting. And we're a very unusual borough like that, but we've got nearly 50% of our children, particularly in primary schools, who will be independently paying for their children to go to primary school, independently paying for healthcare, independently paying for extracurricular activities. So in a sense, that's, you know, that what makes it the more unequal borough, if you're looking at it in that respect. So I didn't answer that very well. Where the all children one is a bit hard to answer because there's such a diverse range of children within our borough.
But I think we have the ambition for all children,
of course.
And I'd say, you know, youth services are an example of universal provision that any child in the borough can access. We have a range of universal offers within our borough. So obviously youth and play, but we also have a range of, we've got our family hubs as well that anyone can access. We have a whole range of public health services in terms of including kind of health visiting. So there's a lot that all children, all families can access. Then there's also, you know, layered on slightly more targeted support, such as the welfare. There's 33 providers within our borough delivering holiday activities and food. Some of those youth providers, play providers, but a whole load of voluntary community sector providers for those who are eligible for free school meals. We also, within our mainstream schools, every mainstream school has a mental health support team providing kind of that earlier intervention in terms of mental health support, emotional wellbeing. So there's quite a lot out there, and those are just some examples in terms of services across our communities to support all of our young people in terms of their well-being in the broadest sense.
Annabelle, do you think you could send us a chart of all the different services the council provides, so that those of us who can't remember or who don't know can be reminded of what we do?
I think Bella Jessup's been working on that.
Yeah.
If we don't have one, that'd be great.
That's part of our 0 to 18 project.
But if we could actually have it.
Yeah, no, in the drafts of it have been circulated. We
Yeah.
send it around.
We've got some new people.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to talk later about work programme, how we're going to evolve that. Just to sort of preempt that in case you're not participating in that work programme discussion. I think certainly I would recommend that we direct at least part of that work to feeding into the 2026 CYPP specification and work, because then it becomes part of what part of it is good that we've done, then it becomes part of an action plan rather than it becomes shelfware. Okay, so if we could move on.
Would you like to say something?
Sorry.
I've just been thinking about a variety of different things that you talked about actually. And as you talk about children that are either needs in one section or children that become and have poor attendance, and you mentioned it earlier, Councillor Fox, that there was correlation between those children that are going from having poor attendance onto having needs. What this doesn't take into account of what this work is that the type of services that mainstream state schools are offering as well.
Yeah.
Because actually there's a variety of different schools offering different services and what impact that has in terms of what happens for those children and whether it has an impact on those children's outcomes. And I'm wondering, when we look at the needs and we look at the children who are missing in education, are there any characteristics that they have in common that actually we could be dealing with much younger in our state schools? Because I have a hunch that a lot of those children, if they were in my schools, are the children that didn't go to clubs, had lower attendance, and then they go on. But I can't prove that, but I have a hunch.
I think you're absolutely right. Exactly that.
And actually, that might be where we could solve it.
Yeah.
With some targeted support.
Thank you, Jacob, very much. Okay, so the next one is priority 7. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yes, please. Thank you, Jack. I think my question relates on how are we supporting those children who are and the youngsters who are affected by grandparents directly and indirectly, where they are privileged. And this is mentioned on slide number 10. So how we ensuring no child or young person falls through the cracks as services transition. And I really want to know, I mean, the opt-out rate of 50%. Do we know the reasons behind it? That's slide number 10.
You want to answer?
Well, no, I think what I was going to say is actually, it was a previous scrutiny round, but our last scrutiny meeting, we had a colleague of mine who leads on the education support to the Grenfell affected children and people, and actually was based within the Grenfell Dedicated Service and moved into children's services. And she was able to bring to life some of the outcomes for the Grenfell impacted children, as well as talk about the new model in place in terms of future services. So it may well be something to share by way of a note in terms of some of the transition in terms of our support offer and those sort of opting out. I think the point that she made at the meeting, at the last scrutiny meeting, was actually this is, we've worked really closely with those families, and this is not a bad thing. This is a positive thing. That they've been supported and actually feel that their needs are stabilised, and they don't need sort of a dedicated offer, and they through kind of the universal or kind of universal targeted offer, that their needs can be met. So I think that it's been positioned very much as positive in terms of feedback that we've had from those receiving those services, and that they feel that they
don't need to be supported.
Exactly in quite that way.
Or that they've chosen that preference for themselves.
Yes, exactly.
I think in some cases she reported that not just a question that they don't want support, but they want to have the ability to direct support that they get themselves rather than it being given to them as a standard product. And it wasn't a question of really saying one's right and one's wrong, it was saying the difference between one of different things. It's a choice. But coming back to the slide, so I think it's worth pointing out, it does say reporting will resume in Q1 of 25-26. Is there any need for this committee to have an update by way of a note in the interim? I think that's.
I think you'll want, so the education hub part of this isn't going to open until September. And I think, you definitely want to probably have early feedback on how that's working. I would have thought, because that's a really interesting piece of the innovative intervention that we're doing for the.
So if Bella and Yusuf could work with the officers, yes, to ensure get the timing right, because the moment, you may not know the precise answer to that question. And we haven't really started our programming finally yet, so then there's going to need some interaction.
Yeah.
To time it.
Yes.
If we could ask that to be put on the agenda for
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else want to say?
You want to ask one about paper effect to do with
Me too. Okay, right, Chloe first.
I have two questions that are very different. First of all, if you were to mark yourself as to how you've done on all 7, what mark would you give yourself?
I defer to Ofsted's judgment.
And I know that they would be, I won't say they'd be very generous, but they have been, you've done very well. But if you were to mark your own, you see where it, and you don't need necessarily answer in full detail, but are there areas where we could do better?
It'd be very arrogant to suggest we could never do better. I mean, you know, one could never say we've got a perfect service, because then, and I think as this is showing feedback, is that we're always listening and we always think what's working, what's not working, how can we change it, how can we intervene earlier. So I think at any point you always say we're still on a curve with that we're, you know, trying to do our best. Probably, you know, we could always do better. And as you know, our pejorative in the light of Grenfell is to be the best counsellor. And certainly for our children and young people, that is something that we are in, you know, this portfolio aiming to be the best counsellor to support our children. So I think it's unfair to ask our officers, because I would say they're fabulous.
I know, I've had your job before, Catherine, so yes.
What I would say is, actually, I think that you've rather cleverly highlighted the areas where we are focusing our attention. So if you look at our performance data, you know, you've talked about attendance, you've talked about suspensions, you've talked about youth justice and serious youth violence. So these will always continue to be an area of focus for us. I think actually we've talked about early intervention and supporting our children and young people early, so that, you know, through some of our new initiatives and early speech and language support. So these are some of the areas that we are continuing to focus on. And actually what safety means in contextual safeguarding, that changes. And you know, we've had a conversation at a previous committee about online safety, for example. And I think in terms of another area of priority, we're really conscious that the needs of some of our young people are changing, becoming increasingly more complex. And I think there probably will be, subject to your decision about an agenda setting, either an addendum to an agenda item or one in and of itself, something looking at some of our highest cost and most complex cases, which are obviously the placement availability is quite difficult, and that there's a limited amount of placements, there's increasing need. So this is a national problem, but it's a big area of focus for us in how do we support those most complex cases. So those are some of the areas that I think, you know, you picked up on most of them already, and they're in our data.
And there's one thing we didn't talk about, but if you go to page slide 4, missing education. I remember talking on years ago with one of our previous chief executive about what kept him awake at night. He said missing children. I just wonder whether you could briefly talk about, in the middle of slide 4, we've got 22 current children who are missing education. Do you think we could talk a little bit more about that? And are there any more that you surmise are missing education, but about whom we don't know because we just don't know details about them?
Well, this is the point that Jackie brought up earlier, exactly that. And I think it's a really good one to find out why they're missing education. You know, is it a long-term health issue? You know, is it they're sort of anxious or anxiety? As we know, anxiety has hugely increased since COVID, of children that just can't face going to. So it's something we've agreed to absolutely look into. And as to your question, are there children that, you know, that we don't even know they're missing? Well, I hope not, but if somebody's just newly arrived or haven't registered, you know, there's always a chance. So you can never say no.
Yes, and actually, I think that's a really good point about in terms of priority and something we're seeing rise. We haven't really talked much about mental health. Again, it's had a real focus at previous scrutiny, but we are doing more work on emotional based school avoidance, and so I'm no doubt that is in part driving some of this figure. And so wrapping some CAM support around our family hubs to support that particular cohort, you know, people who would not go to school for that reason. So I think we've already been asked the question about, you know, who are these young people more representing need? Why are they missing? Which I think we can take away and bring back. But yeah, I think if Newman was here, you know, during that point of the pandemic and school lockdown, I think the biggest anxiety for DCS is holding that kind of statutory role was that actually you have children, you don't have children going to school, you don't have eyes on those children, and being at school is a huge protective factor. And so it's an enormous part of our safeguarding world. So of course it's always a priority, and sort of knowing who they are is a priority, and then working with them closely to get them back into school, get them back into sort of contact or kind of time being kind of receiving education in another way is always been an area of focus.
Okay. Thank you very much. Will.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just two questions about the report as a whole. The first one is in relation to the different priority outcomes and your key achievements. I just note that some are bolded and others aren't. And for some, like number 3, none are bolded. For others, like priority outcome 2, you've got 3 bolded. Now, generally, when I bold something, it's because that's the most important. I just want to ask you, is there any sort of formal meaning to the fact that you've bolded some of them? Are you saying that these are the most important ones within priority 1 or 2, or not? So it might sound like a trite-point, but...
No, it's a good one. I have a feeling that the reason why they're bolded was to try and pull out the commitment, so where we said we would do something. So what we're trying to do, it's a little bit about like how do we neatly do a we said we've done.
Yeah.
So where they're emboldened or in bold, it's because we've said it links directly to a commitment that we've made. So what we're trying to do is hold ourselves to account, say we said this and this is some exact evidence that relates directly to it. That makes sense.
Yeah, that so and you also essentially if it's not bolded, it's we didn't make this commitment, but we've done it anyway and we think it's good, so we still put it in there.
It supports wider commitment,
Okay.
but maybe not directly linked to a specific bullet point.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's really helpful.
Right.
And then my second question was actually just in relation to the listener voices, our children and young people section on page 31. Just curious, the section about anti-racist practice in children's social care. Just curious to know that do children get a choice over what they want to produce, say a video or a topic on, say out of a list of options, or are they directed to produce something on a specific topic? Because I mean, you know, we all agree with not being racist, but there's so many good things that they might want to talk about, being safe out on the street or how to recycle. There's lots of topics they could have chosen. So just curious to know, is it their choice or do they get directed to do things on certain topics?
I would have to have a conversation with our Director of Family Services. So I think this was featured at Family Services conference. I'd have to have a conversation about how that was produced.
So if we could get an actual question for ESIP to
Just
ask
to say,
you.
did you watch the video? Did you click here?
No, I'm not.
But I can say it's really worth doing that and actually watching the video, which might help answer your question. But the video I really love is the one with Alfred talking to the care leaver that he supported. I mean, it's incredibly moving. And just to note to ourselves that the QR code isn't working. When I was trying to follow all those things back.
I tried to use it as well. And
Yeah.
it's not
So, but the
link
videos,
is-
if you're the links are really wonderful to actually just go through them and watch them.
And if I can just come back on that, I'm not saying that it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
They didn't get a lot out of it. It's more that there's lots of good things that they should have done.
Yeah.
I'm keen that the agency is with them. and they can choose what they want to do rather than be directed by people older than you should do something on X. That is what the question was about.
Can I just do an add?
Very briefly.
There have been a number of references further to the last point about the anti-racist practice in children's social care that Councillor Lane just made. A number of references to anti-racism, but I don't see any to another equally topical issue, namely anti-Semitism. Are we aware of that?
It's the same thing.
They're not, they're different.
Religion.
Can I leave that with you?
Yes, I mean, I actually think that this, some of the provenance of this was obviously in the wake of George Floyd. We did have, huge feeling amongst staff looked after children, our young people. Then, which is quite topical right now, Child Q in Hackney, which again prompted a lot of thought about. That was a young a girl who was strip searched in school by police. And actually been a ruling about that recently, but that prompted quite a lot of conversation around how a term called adultification across all agencies, about how those largely, but those who are not white but largely black boys and girls are considered to be they're treated differently in terms of being seen as older, and so we see that in terms, so that's the term adultification, and we see that in terms of difference in outcomes for stop and searches. We see that across the system. So there is something about a point in time that young people felt this was really important to them, that the system thought it was really important to them. We do have data on race and differential of outcome. We have some data on religion belief and outcomes, but by far and away we have a lot on racist on differential and disproportionate outcomes. So to do something here, it doesn't preclude work in any other area in terms of equality or equity, diversity, fairness, inclusion. It's all, this is all important, but this was very much a focused piece of work.
No, I get that, and I'm not expecting you to be able to do work, and I accept that numerically the number of people who are going to be personally affected by anti-Semitism is relatively few, because the Jewish population in this country is relatively few compared with other ethnicities and demographics. But the issue is very topical, and just think back what happened on Sunday. I say no more, but it is a real issue.
Perhaps we could get some guidance in our work program as to whether this whole subject, not specifically about any one race or religious belief, the way in which you've articulated that you take a rounded view with regard to the whole population and all aspects of it. If it's an evolving piece and we need further information on that, I mean, maybe that's something we could ask through you suggest a report or request. But I'm not looking for an answer now, but if we could just ask back. So briefly.
I think a point in time point was really fair. I think when you're looking at anti-Semitism, you might, I want to think about misogyny as well, because we're taking that point in time and really as it's something that we should be thinking about.
And I think that's fair, and I think it's focus on anti-racism isn't to the exclusion of any of anything else. It's all part of building us
against all prejudices
towards EDI, and actually I think practice standards have sort of talked to that.
And maybe you just have that overall overarching title of identity and belonging, which you teach at 3.
Okay, now it falls to me, I'm told by governance, and I should summarise the discussion. I think that I'm going to attempt to do that. And I just want to ask a couple of questions myself. One question is, we have the priorities, and under the priorities we have some actions, and we have some numeracy in the birth rate data. However, my difficulty these sorts of situations is often a sort of Genesis kind of approach, always leads you towards those who are most in need. And yet the greatest good in some ways can be done by doing the general provision or the universal provision well, and so well that you actually are able to bring people in intermediary needs towards the general provision area rather than them needing continuous support. So that's one question, is how do you balance between, not going through one, but overall as an approach between the high, intermediate and general needs? The other question I wanted to ask was that in very crude and overall terms, this committee looks after it's tasked to look at the ages of prenatal till 18. And I know there's the extension for SEN up to 21, 25, depending on circumstances. And then we have the other scrutiny committee, the other department, adult social care and health. Now, the joining of those two, talking to the other committee's chair, we decided rather than trying to make a working group between us to see if we understood each other, that what we would look at very simplistically would be transition between one and the other. Now, from your point of view, do you think that the FCS view of what is important in transition is aligned with the ASC view of what is important in transition? Because if there is alignment, then there should be some flow through about early interventions leading to later life, hopefully less problems and so on, and vice versa. And this is going to become very pertinent in terms of budgeting, because if this council and its partners are under a big squeeze because of various budgetary arrangements, there needs to be some joined up thinking between those two departments. So my question is, transition at 18 or whatever, do you think it's aligned? Now, I'd like to add to that I've got 3 boys, and many other people here have got children as well. Irrespective of what your background, when you leave school, that's one, you used Annabelle phrase that being school wraparound is a huge way of ensuring safeguarding and so on. That falls off a cliff. Whether you leave school at 16 or 18, it happens. And even if you go to university, you're still not within that envelope. The other things that happen are you have less right to place of abode in the borough. There are, if you decide to leave your family home, you probably go to the bottom of the list in terms of housing. So you don't have the school wraparound. If you have a family which is perhaps either you want to leave a family or they want you to leave a family, you've got to think about where you're going to live. You've got to start making money for yourself rather than being provided for. And you've got to look after your health. And the health system, albeit it's free point of delivery and all the rest of it, is something you have to advocate for, or somebody has to advocate for you. You have to apply, be it to your GP or the hospital, and then you have to be agreed to actually fulfill the requirement for the service. And that's a very, very different environment to the wraparound safeguarding arrangement when you're under 18. It's a totally different paradigm. And that happens on your 18th birthday, or at other points too. Now, do you think that we provide the upskilling and resilience to individual children to know that this is coming and to be able to deal with it? In other words, that they are adult ready, previewed school ready. Do we actually do what we need to do in FCS to make our children adult ready?
Well, I would start off slightly going back and saying it can't be a council's whole responsibility to make children ready for that. Yeah. I mean, how could you possibly make sure that all your children?
If you can't,
can I just notice our key, of course, is looking after our care needs. when they're transitioning from being looked after children to becoming care leaves to 25. And they absolutely do get a wraparound service. They get accommodation, they get support, because those are our most vulnerable children. So I would say for those who are our most vulnerable children or our children with disabilities, absolutely, we've really focused on their transition. And in terms of, there were so many things in that, but in terms of cost saving, we're certainly in terms of the funding looking at, some things that actually care for children and accommodation for children with high needs is much more expensive in children's services than it is in adult services. So we're looking actually that can we transition children faster into adult services where the same care will actually cost less once they're in adult services than children's services. So I would say that, the transition of our children ready for the shock that's going to happen to them when they leave school is responsibility for a whole, whether it's schools getting them ready, it's obviously the families getting them ready, responsible for it, the whole round of things. So the answer would be, I don't think the council could possibly ever say, yes, we've absolutely prepared all our children. It would be an unrealistic thing to say.
I think that's right. So up to 25, we've got 2 cohorts of young people we look after, which are the 2 that you've talked about. Yeah. So care leavers who get a personal assistant and they work with them. They secure final stage accommodation and they work with all of those things, sort of the budgeting, the GP, all of those things to support them into becoming an adult because we are their corporate parents. Yeah. And then similarly for young people as they transition into adulthood who have special educational needs or disability, when they meet that adult threshold, we have a team of officers that work together to make sure we start planning from 14 to make sure that transition happens. But I think that your point is a little bit broader about are we getting the skills right? And it's interesting when we've done kind of big bits of engagement around our youth services, actually in developing this plan, our young people said, wouldn't it be lovely if if we learned more about what it was like to budget, to maybe run a business, to exist in this real world, and interesting reflections about the national curriculum actually, and some of what they're learning and what they like to learn, and actually, so it's been an ever evolving piece to think about what we put into some of our youth services around adulthood, CV development, opportunities. I know schools do an awful lot in terms of career advice, support, next step or follow on kind of advice and support. So yes, I think there's probably more that can happen through our existing services. And as I say, that's the reason why for our new youth contracts, sort of employment and skills is one of the key priorities that our youth and play prize have to sort of bid against and evidence. That's what young people say they want.
One of the learnings might be that if we're not capable collectively with partners, including the individuals themselves and their parents and so on, maybe the services we produce have to be rebalanced a bit. We need to ask questions about whether the curriculum in schools is actually the right one for adulthood. Because I personally witnessed real stress and problems in young people around this area, although they've had both in state and private sector very good and Ofsted approved where it's Ofsted and the other systems, but they've actually done these establishments they've been to, the services they've had are all excellent, and yet they find the transition traumatic, and it is something that happens like a cliff edge.
Yeah, well, obviously, as you know, all our secondary schools are academies and out of our control. I'm worried as you with the academies now not having the choice to choose their own curriculum as they used to have, but they're going to be prescribed it. So I guess we need to wait and see what the government decides to prescribe for academies to teach.
Just to clarify, if they teach the national curriculum, it's the starting point.
Right.
It's not the end point of what everybody has to teach.
Okay. Yeah.
And even going back to John Lynch's government, where they had the Deering Commission and reduced it to 80% of curriculum, that's never been reversed. They're actually, even if they have to teach all of the national curriculum, they can teach other things as well.
Addition, yeah.
Yeah, so
But
it's not,
it's slightly
the description
shifting
is
then.
not quite all encompassing.
Shifting.
Don't be so worried, is what I would say.
Okay, so unless there are any particular major points people want to manage, I'd like to say a big thank you, obviously, for producing this report. It's a very small point I made about the way this was constructed in the future, about having different priorities hang together as a aim of data and interpretive material. And to say thank you to everybody who's participated. And no doubt we'll talk much further about the drafting of CYPP for 26 and put more letters like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Right. By the way, we are not quite on the programme, but that's a good discussion. So let's move on to work programme. Now, by way of outline of the work programme, for those of you who weren't involved, this process started effectively by governance going out to a wide range of people, including the councillors. Thank you very much. Thanks, Going to councillors, officers, the residential residents community, and a very wide scope to ask for suggestions for what is called the long list for the scrutiny topics for the next year. A couple of months, 6-8 weeks ago, we had a so-called SIFT arrangement where we had a workshop and we went through by the device select committee to take that long list and turn it into a list of priorities to which was added the statutory and standing items. So you have in your papers both the long list and also that list of priorities under A5 Appendix 1. And then in addition to that, Bella has also circulated a draft programme for what we're going to be doing this year. Now, what that essentially does is to fix in time those statutory things that we have to do, and those regular reports that we have to take, and the budget work we have to do, and such like. There is some space left in the programme, and there needs to be some interaction with officers going forward. The next stage of this process is for us to have a brief discussion about the priorities list. It's still, the door is still open if there's a major item missing. Somebody has a burning thing that we think is not on this priorities list. And the idea is that by the beginning of next week, that Bella will have drawn together a revised version of this to put to the FOB and Scrutiny Committee, as chaired by Mary Wheel, has just had to leave the meeting. So my suggestion is that this priorities list. First of all, I'd like to ask the first question, which is, do you feel that the right choices are being made? But I don't want to open up a whole can of worms again, but if anybody thinks they have a big problem with priorities, now's the time to speak. So I think that'd be the first question. So are you all happy to go with the priorities which came out of the workshop that we had?
On point 8, the bullet point 1, on attendance, did we make sure that we get the data for primary and secondary that precedes COVID and not just post-COVID?
Right.
I think you need to see them. You need to know
Historically as well as currently.
Yes, you need to know it.
Good point. I think the next. So if basically we're happy with that list, and the next step.
Will, I am. I just love, and that doesn't need to be. We need to work on it. I would love to have sent to us a chart saying what activities are provided by which independently funded organisations on which days, and what activities are funded by the council, so that we can know as councillors, on Monday this is happening in the north, on Tuesday this is happening in the centre of the borough, and on Wednesday this is happening in the south of the borough, so that we can see what's happening when, and if there are any gaps, what the gaps are.
Right, I think that would be an addition to our 0 to 18
Yeah,
strategy.
I think
So how is that communicated? How is the information you've collected? Bella has done a lot of work talking to different parts of the council, to agencies such as schools, to voluntary sector and such like, and to partners such as the NHS and so on, and putting it into that 0 to 18 mapping that she's done. But the point you've made, I understand it, is the question is, once you've got that, those links and so on, how is that communicated and how is that accessed? I believe that there is an emerging technological solution to this where, if I understand it correctly, the problem with doing what you've asked for is that you need to have a secretariat that receives stuff and puts it onto the website. It would need to be on the website. That secretariat is very expensive. There is, however, a technical solution, which is if a school is, for instance, licensed to self-promote, put stuff on the stuff about what they have in the way of out of school hours, clubs and such at their premises, or those sorts of things. But if they are licensed to put it on, it's in their interest to put it on, and it doesn't need to be a central secretariat. It's a different kind of way of doing it, and that is much, much cheaper to organise. But the software to do that is still a new art. I wouldn't say a science, I say it's a new art. And I think there's an opportunity to get a real answer to that, to your point, because to answer it 5 years ago would have required a whole department of the council to do it. We can't afford that. What we can do is use the new technology that's coming out to do this, to get the same results at a cost that we can't afford. So I think it's something that we put on the list of what we would like to see. And we are not operational as a scrutiny committee, but we can challenge the officers to address that question. Are you happy with that? We add it to that.
Ella has heard what I've said, Bella's heard what you've said. As long as I see what happens, I'm happy.
Okay. So,
and if she wants to get in touch with me as well, independently, they tell us.
Thank you. Any other points people want to make at this stage? Councillor?
Well, I think that part of the councillor question is, I don't know about the schools, but when it comes to the voluntary sector and the youth services, all those groups are funded by the council through Young KNC.
Yeah.
There's a website called Our City, which is shared facility for both Kirsten Charles and Westminster. So every individual group are funded, they have to put their program into that website.
Yeah.
So if you look at that website, it will show you who's doing what. But that's the voluntary sector. I don't know about the schools.
That's precisely the sort of technical solution I was talking about. Our City, I've definitely heard of it. The trouble is, the last time I looked up Our City, there was only a very small population on there. And that was about a year ago I initially heard about it. I think it is the way forward, but whether we could have another look at it. But certainly something along those lines, because it's each individual youth club that has the need to promote itself, and if it's given a platform with rules as to what you can put on or how you have to present things, then they can be useful to the general population. But it's the communication of the capacity that you've identified on your map. Right. So if we're generally happy with the priority list, the next thing I wanted to suggest is some of these priorities, if not repetitive, are certainly capable of grouping in terms of themes. For instance, if you think about resources, for instance, as a thing, things like transformation and budgeting and finance and such like. So what I was going to ask was if you're prepared to let Bella do some work to get a rough grouping of these, because what I would like to try to do is to get this, rather than having sort of 15 parts over the couple of pages, we can get that down to sort of 5 or so themes. That might be slightly easier to fit into our program, because certain aspects of each theme will be ready in September for going into our programming, and some things will not be ready until January, February, March, or whatever next year. And officers will be able to work with Bella and Luke to work those things together. So if you're happy that that job is done, to present the priorities, we won't change the words and the content, but what we'll do is just group some of this together.
Carry on, good idea.
The other things, I think we ought to just focus a little bit on visits and connection with people outside. The suggestions are broadly Preston Junction, Ormiston, and Balby as one sort of grouping of visits. We had last year's committee had a presentation by the head of Ormiston, which we were very pleased that he presented, if you like, a vision, and he presented an opportunity, and he told us about things. And I think it would be very good if it could be. I know it might be difficult as to how we organise these visits. It'd be useful if we asked officers to get back in touch with Ormiston and find out how they could communicate us better, because it's all very well to have somebody come here and give us a presentation in committee. I think we need some more direct experience of the excellent work that they are apparently done. We've had very good reports. I think it'd be good if we could get nearer to that. So,
In the past, we have, as a committee, had meetings such as this off-site in schools. We want to do that. So if I ask now, in July, and we want to do it, it might happen. If I ask in December, it won't.
No, I think that I think just going somewhere for going somewhere's sake. If we go out of hours and don't experience anything from the place, the best meetings we've had were visits where we actually saw places in operation. So it's a good question. If we leave it with our officers to talk with FCS, I think it fulfills exactly what the previous discussion was about performance and such. We would like to try to learn, to get experience ourselves of what's happening in practice. And there's nothing like a physical visit to get that. If we just arrive at an institution which for safeguarding and security reasons has to channel us into a private room, and we just have our meeting at that address, but we don't actually experience anything happening there, then I don't think it's worth doing it for the sake of that, because it is easier for officers to arrange these sorts of meetings here. And it's worth going somewhere else if we get more exposure.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it might be possible for us maybe to go to a meeting somewhere at 5:30, 6, so we can be taken around and shown.
That's the point. If we can get an ally, a visit, if you like, experience, then that has to be worked.
So like if you went to Rugby Portobello, for instance, you could go there at 5:30, but then go and have your meeting either at Rugby Portobello or on a location very close to it.
We're providing the facilities there, and as long as the internet's there, I think that's basically what we need.
It's pointless going to most primary schools at hope that.
Did you have a point? Well, you wanted to raise?
No, I suppose very briefly, just looking out in terms of the visit section. I sort of know we spoke quite a bit about sort of youth clubs and mentioned Rugby Portobello. I sort of wonder whether it's worth including one of those in there alongside the schools.
Okay.
Just as a potential option.
Or in Nottingdale.
Well, there's a whole system through Young KNC, so we could get some guidance from Young KNC about what's working, what's not working, and when they actually visit.
Or the KNC Foundation.
Maybe the Young KNC and KNC Foundation.
If they host it and take around.
Well, one thing that I'd love to have for a session, quarter an hour, 20 minutes, asking Victoria at KNC Foundation what her observations of what we are doing are.
Right.
She comes from a separate perspective.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've already said that we would go to young kids.
No,
KNC.
The young KNC is not the same as KNC.
No, I appreciate I missed it. KNC Foundation would be a good place to visit and a place to have that tell us that as when we visit. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So there's nothing else we'll do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Will,
Thank you. Will, thank you. Thank you, Yusuf, thank you.
And I hope you've enjoyed your first session.
Immensely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your participation. It's been very